Spoilers ahead for Baz Luhrmann's Elvis and other Baz Luhrmann things. Hi everybody, welcome to another episode of The Script Department. We are here today chatting about the new Baz Luhrmann film, Elvis, which is out in cinemas right here, right now. But before we get going on that, don't forget to like, share, subscribe, all of that good stuff. We are available on YouTube, on Spotify, on Apple Podcasts, all that kind of stuff. So go find us there. You can also check us out at thescriptdepartment.net to see what our global network of screenwriters are up to. They all sort. It's really cool. You should totally go check us out there. And you can also buy us a coffee now. So that's nice. You thirsty for a coffee, Fiona?
Yeah, I definitely am. I think a coffee is a small and helpful and very kind thing to do, isn't it?
I agree.
Don't you think?
I love buying people coffees. And so if you
So
guys
do I.
wanted to buy us a coffee, you can. It's in the description below, so you can get involved in that. But now, Fiona, let's get on to the thing at hand. I want to preface this whole conversation by saying I like Baz Luhrmann. I enjoy. I think it's
a
important.
Scary start, isn't it?
Yeah. I think it's important to say I like Baz Luhrmann. I like his style, generally speaking. But I'm far from a super fan. I don't know that much about it. I've seen most of his features. I've never seen Strictly Ballroom, which I feel as though will possibly have me thrown out of
That's
of
it.
the script
You're
department.
out. Let's cut right now.
I know John's going to be furious, but it's just never appealed to me particularly. I'll get to it at some point, but certainly Romeo and Juliet, Moulin Rouge, Australia. I love them. They're epic, wonderful, beautiful films. But
there it is.
This one, and we'll get into it. We'll get into it properly. We'll get into some proper analysis of this. But I had a bad time at the cinema watching Elvis. I really, really struggled with this film for a number of reasons that we can explore and kind of get into. How did you feel? Just your general. What was your first reaction? You stepped out the cinema. The light hit you in the face. You were like,
I
how'd
was
you feel?
like, this is better than some of the other ones I've seen of Luhrmann, particularly The Great Gatsby, which I have a particular problem with.
Okay.
But there's a challenge in some of the ways that Baz Luhrmann puts together a story that I can't get over. But this seemed to get over them. So we seem to have some slightly different opinions. So this is going to be a very interesting conversation.
So we do, and yes, indeed. All right, so I'm gonna dive into this first and foremost with the structure of this, and that you've referenced kind of Baz Luhrmann putting films together and things like that in your little bit there. But I find the thing that struck me as weirdest here, and I thought initially when I heard about this film, I thought that's really interesting to tell the story of Elvis Presley from the point of view of his manager that no one's ever heard of. What an interesting decision to kind of go down that route. And I did genuinely, that sounds like I'm being sarcastic, but I did genuinely go into this film going, God, I can't wait to see how this works and how they kind of navigate that thing. I've come out the other end utterly bewildered at that decision.
Wow, okay.
In terms of like, first and foremost, you're putting an actor like Tom Hanks under a level of prosthetic that you can barely see his face move. Like the subtlety, the nuances of that performance, I feel were completely lost. And nuance is not necessarily something I would often attribute to Luhrmann, but I think an actor like Hanks brings something like that. But also from a structural story point of view, you begin the film saying, "Oh, I'm going to tell the story of Elvis, and I've been misrepresented." And I'm punching my microphone. I'm so angry about it. I've been misrepresented, and all this, that, and the other. And so I'm going to tell this story from my point of view. This unreliable narrator. Interesting viewpoint. At the beginning, I was like, "Yeah, man, okay, I'm into it." But then we spend great swathes of this film without him in it. We spend a lot of time with Elvis where and explore areas that the Colonel could have had no idea of, and just absolutely no kind of understanding of what that would be, with also fragmented narration that doesn't really indicate the idea that he is telling the story and he's filling in gaps and perhaps he's fabricating things. That doesn't come across, and then we end with him, but not really, because before we can actually close it off, and he can say, and that's the story of Elvis, man, and now I'm off to go do my thing. It cuts to Elvis died at this time, the Colonel died at this time, and we get that. So it felt structurally, that decision felt A, totally underused, B, at times baffling, and three, unresolved. And I think that's the trick here, is that if you were, I can see an argument that this character as an unreliable narrator is telling us he's explaining things that he knows, and he's filling in gaps, and he's kind of those areas where he's not involved. He's coming in and he's sort of saying, well, I don't know, but I guess this might have happened. But we're never told that. We're never shown that.
Yeah.
That's never indicated. So you're left as an audience to kind of wonder, well, how does he know this? Is he actually telling us this story, or is this just a weird framing device that really doesn't go anywhere? And ultimately, I'm left on that side of things with that. I think it's, for me, the lesson on that one, as we tried to find at the script department, is if you're going to use a framing device, go for it. Don't half-ass it, because on this occasion, I felt it was really half-assed. I've monologued there. What did you feel about that?
Okay, wow. Okay, so a lot to unpack there. I guess from my point of view, I came at it slightly differently. So I probably appreciated it more because I went in. Okay, so where do we begin? I guess my challenge with Luhrmann as a filmmaker, as a storyteller, is I love his aesthetic. There's, everything he does is lavish and luscious and extraordinary and, complicated and amazing and overwhelming. It's a visual spectacle when you go to see a Luhrmann film.
Absolutely,
particularly the ones as, more in more recent times. And for me, as a writer or just as an audience member, what that does to me in big films, and I know we're not going to do a Luhrmann retrospective here, but just to use the example of like The Great Gatsby, which I think illustrates my point pretty nicely, is I find the bigger the spectacle with Luhrmann's films, the more at arm's length I am from the storytelling. So I feel like I watch a Luhrmann film unfold in all its splendor in front of me, but I don't feel like I'm immersed in the story, and I don't feel like I relate to the characters very much. And certainly Great Gatsby was an excellent example of where I felt quite dislocated from the story. If you consider, for example, the original Great Gatsby with Robert Redford and Mia Farrow, which the Luhrmann film is not a patch on that movie because for that exact reason, there isn't the emotional depth there at all. So generally how I come to Luhrmann films is with a bit of cynicism around, is this going to be incredible to watch? And as I said, I love the aesthetic. I love what he does visually. But as a storyteller, I feel a bit at sea generally with some of those bigger, more recent productions. However, I felt with Elvis, I think he achieved a lot more I felt much more immersed in this film as a story. I felt much more I connected with the characters much better than I have done with previous films. And I felt this was and I get your unreliable narrator point, and I think that's really valid. I think the thing that struck me about this film was it was kind of a relationship story where it was almost there's some interesting parallels. It's sort of a story of an abuse of power, really, right?
Yeah.
And
absolutely.
I guess if I think about my relationship with Elvis, like if I think of how I know of Elvis, which is funnily enough, my views of Elvis were always comical and kind of mythological. It's some guy that died on the toilet, or maybe he's flipping burgers somewhere in Nevada, or we don't, he's this comically mythical creature that I don't really get at all. So this film was really interesting to me because it cut through that, and I actually got a sense of the man, and I got a really good sense of this abusive relationship, this power relationship that he was in. And I think some people talk about it as a cautionary tale, and I didn't feel it was that necessarily, but I did think about the idea of people as products, and and power and and people and relationships and power and it was a really interesting moment in America. I thought gave us some really interesting insight into where America was, and some of those things about people as products, we live it now even more so. I guess maybe that's where my headspace was going through the film, and probably why I felt like I got a little bit more out of it. Um, Having said that, though, I think some of your points around the characterization, particularly, were a bang on, and I think the Tom Hanks character for me, or his characterization, um, was a little bit problematic in that respect because he had the potential to really make that film,
Yeah.
I don't think he did. Um, yeah, so kind of interesting, sort of
Yeah.
slightly different perspective, but
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right in terms of the overarching characterization with Luhrmann films, and it's interesting. I actually forgot about The Great Gatsby. That's how
mm.
kind of little I connected with that one. I forgot that existed. But I think for me to talk a little bit more about Elvis as a character.
Yeah.
Because ultimately, framing device out the window. That's this film. It's his name above the thing. This is who he is. This is who it's about, right?
Yep.
And I think for me, the first hour of this film felt like a montage. It felt the pacing of this thing was so rapid and so relentless, and and again, which is a hallmark of a Luhrmann, a Berman, I know you said that, Baz Luhrmann production. This very very fast, vicious, almost pacing that we're going, and I didn't hate it. I didn't hate that element of it, but I do think it needed to step back a minute because I had no indication of who Elvis was as a person until until we got into the second, probably about halfway through the second act. I had no idea who he was, and I didn't know, I didn't really care about him. He remained this sort of mythical figure, and it felt almost as if we were going through. And I think the thing for me that I didn't feel like the film cared about him either, and perhaps that comes back to this narrator standpoint and this kind of bookending structure. I didn't feel anyone cared about him. I felt as though we were going through the motion, and perhaps that's intentional. If that's what, because I can see that being, when you kind of you put all that together and you think, okay, this is a framing, to use your phrase, people as products, and you have his manager is telling this story and he doesn't really care about him. He just cares about the money and things like that. I can see how that perhaps would be a thing and how he'd rush through his childhood until he came into it. And I would get that if it stopped at the point where he entered the story, but it doesn't stop when he enters the story. The pacing continues.
It continues on. Yes.
And it continues really, really quickly. So actually, I don't think that's what he's doing. And if he is doing that, I think he misses the mark in that. And I just feel like when we get into it, and absolutely, I want to praise Austin Butler because he was an
amazing,
absolute powerhouse in this film, and the concert sequences are wonderful. They're so great. And later on in the film, I think you do get to know him a little bit better. But I almost think that you get to know him a bit better, almost in spite of Luhrmann, and I feel as though it's Austin Butler's performance shining through the glitter a little bit, and you catch glimpses of this brilliant performance that's going on under all of this sheen and under all of this stuff, to understand that, oh wow, there's some great performance and there's some great writing and there's some great characterization, and to really kind of get to grips with the man who was Elvis. But I think you need to strip away a lot of stuff, and I think you need to kind of squint through the sheen to get to the point where you can see it. And that was exhausting for me. I was so tired by the end of this film trying to pick out those elements of character. And I just don't think it, I don't know. I just don't think it specifically. I'm sorry, I'm monologuing again, but there is a particular moment I want to. There's a particular thing I want to talk about in terms of pacing. So we have this initial run that kind of culminates at the show where he's told, no, you can't do your hips thing. We're going to be cancelled. And then he just goes, you know what? No, I'm going to do it anyway. And everyone's really excited, and segregation and everything. I'm doing it again. And people kind of and
You're
people
really
break
passionate
down.
about this film,
I'm
aren't
so
you?
passionate. Yeah. People break down that barrier and things like that. It's a good scene. It's a really good scene, actually.
Yeah.
But then at that point, we are then suddenly, okay, Elvis is going to the army. Okay, Elvis is having his haircut. Oh, now his mum's
Yes.
dead. Oh, now he's
Yes.
back from the army, but we've never seen him in the army. He had his haircut, but we never saw him with his haircut. That's a
Yeah.
whole. It just doesn't. The film just doesn't care about that part of his life, which is
No.
weird because it puts so much emphasis on it being transformative, and yet it doesn't
Yes.
show us anything.
Yes.
And
Yes.
then we suddenly fast forward through his entire film career. We don't see any of that really. We see little glimpses of it, and then we are
Mm.
only, I think, 20 minutes to half an hour after we saw that brilliant performance where he chose to do that, and he stood there going, "You know what? I think I need to go back to doing what I do best, and it's been a long time since I did all of that." And you're like, "Hang on, that was half an hour ago. What are you talking
Yeah.
about?" And again,
Yeah.
from obviously in world it's longer, but from an audience's point of view, you have no sympathy for that character because you just
Mm.
saw him do it. Whereas
Mm.
if I
Yes.
think if yeah, that, I struggled with that particularly. I think.
Yeah, no, and I think you're right actually, and I guess it's a really interesting point because I agree it did fly through it, and I also think just your earlier point about certainly the opening or the beginning sort of sequence, I did worry because of the pace of flying through. The world wasn't. I didn't feel like the world was really well set up at the very beginning. It did feel like we were sort of rushing, rushing, rushing. Um, and so I definitely felt that. And I guess it probably about sort of 10, 15 minutes in, I was thinking, oh, here we are again. We've got another Luhrmann spectacle that's going to be, we're going to be watching it at arm's length and not really know. And I felt that's what we had. But I did feel that shift. And I think you're right about the shift happening in the second act,
Mm,
probably about halfway through the second act. And
yeah.
it almost felt a little bit like it was two films in a way. It felt like there was this really sort of rushed. It wasn't even a setup because I mean that was basically 20 years of Elvis's life in sort of 2 hours 40 minutes, right? But the way I rationalized that to myself was that think I think I think the film deliberately wasn't biopicky in that sense because I think at the heart of it it's about the relationship between two people, and that was
Mhm,
the hub of it. So I think,
yeah.
I mean, you're absolutely right. So I think, what was it? When was his big? When did he first become huge? It's like 1956 or something, or
Something
60,
like that.
yeah,
Yeah.
something like that. Something like that. He had this year when he
Yeah.
was like, and the hayride thing. Anyway, I don't know the details,
Mm,
but when he sort of really came onto the scene and really became huge, and we didn't get a sense of that either. So we didn't really get this sense of this guy becoming huge. We just had these really sort of random moments. But then I was thinking about, well, why do we get these random moments? And it's not a biopic, and it's not supposed to be, because I've also heard some sort of negativity around the film that well, he didn't really look like Elvis, or some of the stuff wasn't done to detail. And I don't think that was what they were trying to do, what he was trying to do with the film. But what I do think is if you think about it from a character point of view, as flawed in some ways as those characters were created, I think ultimately it's about you've got a protagonist of Elvis, you've got an antagonist of the Colonel, you've got a protagonist who doesn't win,
mm.
an antagonist that does. So you've got a tragedy, right?
Yeah.
And I
Oh,
think
100%. Yeah.
that was the thing. And I thought, well, that so what am I supposed to take from that? If that's kind of what's happening from a character point of view, we've got we've got a character story, and I don't think we were meant to necessarily hang on to all of those points in his career. I, I,
Mm,
I think you're right about perhaps they weren't as deftly. I think there's some clunky communication of that, like maybe a little bit too much information without the depth. So you go, hang on, what was that about? For
mm.
someone like me who doesn't really know much of his life at all.
Yeah.
So definitely that. But then I think ultimately where I got to with it was actually this is about, and I think that's when probably at that second act and towards the end of the second act where I kind of got that sense of the character and what was really going on between them and thought, actually, this is a really, really sad story about a person who's been in this really abusive relationship, essentially. And what does it mean to have someone whose life is and whose well-being is irrelevant to what they actually produce, and the whole country was happy to take that, and the
Yeah.
media was happy to take that. And so I think that's sort of where my res- reconciliation with the film was in that
Yeah.
space.
I agree. I actually really agree with that. I didn't know I agreed with that, but I totally agree with that. I think you're right. I think this is two films, and I think it is about a relationship. So I think there are some crucial errors that have been made
Mm.
in if that's what this is, and I think you're right that that's what this is. Then why are we calling it Elvis? Because you call
Mm.
it Elvis, and people expect a Elvis biopic, and then you lean into those expectations by giving him the childhood and everything like that. If you want to tell the story of two individuals like that, then you can effectively cut out everything that happens before the Colonel meets him. You tell the story
Mm.
of the Colonel's life and how it
Mm.
interacted with Elvis,
Mm.
and
Yes,
and all of that. That I think would be a far more compelling film. And
I do agree
and
with you on that. Yeah, I think it would have been
yeah,
a much better film. Yeah, and
because
closer alignment to what it appears to be trying to achieve, if that is
mm,
in fact
yeah,
what it's trying to achieve. Yeah.
yeah, I think so, and also then retains Elvis as kind of this mythical figure. Because I think I get why you might want to distance yourself from Elvis being the sole protagonist sort of thing, because he is quite mythic, and he is, you kind of want to keep him at arm's length in order to, in the same way you don't want too much of Darth Vader, because Darth Vader becomes not too scary the moment you have too much of Darth Vader. In the same way, I wonder if you humanize Elvis too much, then perhaps some of the sheen comes off of him. I don't know if that's true, but I don't think it's necessarily true here. But I think that's more due to the performance than anything else. But I think that, yeah, I think you're right. Perhaps we should do a Great Hollywood rewrite on this one at some stage,
That would be
and
interesting, actually.
be a fun. That would be a fun. That would be a really fun thing, I think.
Yeah,
Because
yeah,
I think
yeah,
if you focus in on an aspect of Elvis's life, rather, because so musical biopics, we've had a few of them in recent years. We had Rocket
yeah,
Man, Elton
yeah.
John. We had Bohemian Rhapsody. We've had
That's right.
Elvis now, and Rocket Man, I loved. I loved Rocket
Me
Man because
too.
it did something a little bit different, found a different way of telling that story, and kind of, but really, it was about Elton John in every single
Mm.
way. But and humanized him. I mean, you want to look at a framing device, right? That therapy session where he sat there and he's slowly losing his feathers is
Yeah.
so great. It's so
Yes. Yeah.
clever. Like,
Yeah.
that's how if you want to frame a biopic in an interesting way, then you go do that.
Do that. Yeah.
Bohemian Rhapsody recently has. I actually only watched it about a week ago. Weirdly, it was
Oh,
off my
okay.
radar for years, but I finally got to it.
Right.
And Mercury having this kind of that big Live Aid concert as their framing device. You start there, you end there. Again, great, lovely framing device, and I think that I think Bohemian Rhapsody isn't as good as Rocket Man. I don't think it achieves as much as it is in terms of what it tries to do. And I think the difference is that without and I think that's the same here, to pull it back round again. Without Rocket Man, I think stands on its own. I think you could tell that story without the musical numbers, and I think it would still
Oh,
stand up.
definitely. Yeah. Absolutely
Just a
agree.
compelling story about a
Mm.
guy. If you were to remove the Queen from Bohemian Rhapsody, and if you were to remove the Elvis from Elvis, I don't know that those films necessarily stand as tall as they would do with them included. And my point being there
Mm.
with this one, you remove those concert sequences, what they're the bits I enjoyed from this.
Mm.
They're the rest of this I found it was far more sort of almost tedious in places. And I think that
Interesting.
take them out of that, which of course you can't. Why would you? You'd never do
No.
that.
Yeah.
But as a kind of an academic thought process, I think
Mm.
you know we always say that you should be able to tell a story as a silent film. It's the same
Yeah.
kind of idea in this one. You should be able to tell the story without the music and it still have the same messages.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you're right. I'm just thinking about that actually. It's a really good point, and I definitely agree on Rocket Man. I think that's such a strong storytelling, and so well narrated, if you like, or the narration is really strong. Um, yeah, I'm just thinking back to Bohemian Rhapsody. I think there is probably some synergies between Bohemian Rhapsody and Elvis, although I do think that the sort of difference around big numbers the big numbers section of the film, which was around the Las Vegas residency, if you like. I think that was just a little bit different for me in that, that was such a key moment where I keep using the phrase abuse of power, and it's not necessarily that. But actually,
I
at
think
that
it
point,
is though. Yeah.
and it kind of that was its high point, and I
Mm.
felt for me that was the point where it was almost like, okay, this is where it teeters into tragedy now. This is
Yeah.
where Elvis is lost
Mm.
because he'd lost his personal freedom, his creative freedom, his spiritual freedom. There was his quest for freedom, which is ultimately the what he was looking for
Yeah. Yeah.
in this, was lost. And so I felt that was really an important kind of mechanic in the film, as well as the music, which of course everybody loved, and his performances were incredible. And it's often cited as the high point of his career. But for me, I had no idea. In fact, I saw the film with my husband, and when we walked out, my husband was like, I didn't understand why Elvis never left America. And now I understand why he never left America. And so there was a real sort of aha moment for me around my memory of, yeah, I knew he played in Las Vegas for years, but that's all I knew. And you get this really interesting insight. So I felt that musical moment, even though, yes, and on one level you should be able to take it out, was actually so tied into the
Yeah.
demise of the character. It needed to be in there because it's such
Mm.
a critical point. But I
Yeah.
think generally, you're right about being able to take that stuff out and still having a compelling story. And I
Mm.
wonder, I wonder if this would have been possibly not.
Possibly
I don't
not.
know.
Let's look at that sequence in the film a little bit, because that whole section where he enters the international hotel, and again we start on that as well. We've come full circle at that point. And I'm pretty sure that is pretty well where we meet the beginning. That
Mm,
frame is in that
mm,
sequence there when we get to the international. That whole bit that felt like a prison, and it felt uncomfortable. It felt like a prison for the audience.
definitely.
The
Yes.
and compliments here for Luhrmann. Those repeated shots of coming into the international hotel and seeing that big looming large. He repeats that again and again and again and again, and I think and it's uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable to see, and I think it's a really interesting and really great decision by the director there to actually try and make this uncomfortable for the audience as well. Um, Seeing that the final sort of performance that he gives of Unchained Melody, which kind of comes at the end of this section. And it is so powerful. I mean, having said I had a difficult time with it, I did well up a little bit at that particular moment, because it was so beautiful. But again, I think
Mm,
that's performance over filmmaking, um,
mm,
in that particular section. And again, to that point of you remove those bits, is it's powerful. But the that section for me was where this film was at its best, when the is Elvis at the international and the tragedy of that situation. And I think it was executed very well, because, and you know what the thing is, I think the reason it's executed so well is because the glitter and sparkle of Lerman takes a back seat. It feels as though
exactly.
it stops. He stops showing
Exactly.
off, and he just lets the um,
Exactly. And that goes back to my very first point,
Yeah,
which is my problem with Lerman, which is where the spectacle overtakes the story.
yeah,
And and I think that's why this one worked better for me, because it did. It absolutely felt like he stepped back. And
yeah,
that beautiful shot, that beautiful haunting and kind of terrible shot, or that repeated shot where Elvis is looking out into sort of the darkness of Las Vegas,
yeah,
like he's in a fishbowl, like
yeah,
his,
yeah,
and
yeah,
it's just it was beautiful, and but it didn't need all the kind of, what do they call it, the bazamataz, I
yeah.
think. Like it doesn't it
Oh,
doesn't
that's
need that.
great. Yeah,
I've heard
I've
that
not heard
somewhere. I
that
thought
before.
it was really
Yeah,
good.
I really like that.
But
Yeah,
yeah, it doesn't need that, and I think it was smart of him or his writers or whoever to know that point of when to pull back, and yeah, and that's why I think that certainly that second half of the film was worked much much better than it
yeah,
may ordinarily have. Yeah,
yeah. No, for sure. I
interesting.
think that I think I want to talk about, so a little. This is a tricky area. This one, but I want to talk about the discussion this film makes of Elvis as the appropriator. And I'm not again. I do not have all that much knowledge of Elvis Presley historically, but I'm aware of this conversation around Elvis. Did he appropriate black culture? Was he, or was he just was he a fan of it? I think that kind of distills it. Did he appropriate it, or what? Did he just love the music and he wanted to sing it? I think that's a gross oversimplification of that argument. However, for the purposes of this conversation, I I I really struggled with that element of this film because I feel as though the film seems to it approaches it and it tries to deal with it, but it doesn't really make a compelling argument in either direction. They play up his connection with black culture and his historical background and his upbringing and things like that, and then they kind of imply that he was some kind of activist, which I'm pretty sure Elvis wasn't. They kind of make a point about that, and they intercut in a weird section where with the reported death of Martin Luther King, dovetailing with a conversation about his career, which I thought was kind of gross. And then we see this element of segregation where he's singing and he's doing his dancing, and then the fence comes down and people are able to mix. And again, it seems to kind of hold him up and like he wasn't appropriating. He was upholding, and he just loved that music and all this, that, and the other. But then it just drops it. Then it just drops it. The whole story of black culture and his influence on its influence on Elvis's life just drops it. The moment it stops making him look good, it's just not there anymore. We never go, but we do actually. We go back very briefly to see, I think it's Sister Rosetta passes away, and he has this weird, I am almost certain, shot in reshoots section where he kind of sits there and thinks, oh, I should have gone back and performed with her when she asked, and now I've lost my moment in time, and things like that.
Compliments for the voice there, by the way.
Thank you very much.
Just as an aside, I've noticed that twice now. It's excellent. Yeah. Sorry.
I love an impression. Yeah, I don't know. I think the long and short of it for me was that I just feel like this film, rather than actually making an argument in either direction, it tries to kind of go, yeah, maybe a little bit of both, but also uses black culture in order to make its protagonist look good, and then disregards it the moment it's there. Now, it could be that Luhrmann is making a point and saying, well, that's what Elvis did. But if he is doing that, then there needed to be more comment from the black community on the fact that Elvis was doing that, which just doesn't exist in this film. The voices of the black community are almost non-existent.
Yes, and I think that's a really good point, because that was one of the things I noticed was there are a couple of points in the film where Elvis was with Fats Domino, I think it was Fats Domino, and a few moments in the film where he was like, I'm not the king, this is the king to Fats Domino, but the Fats Domino character was just nothing. Like it was like he didn't exist. And I was like, well, if that's truly how Elvis felt, and if that's what his thoughts were, and that's what he was trying to be portrayed as, well, then you would build that character to actually show us why. I think there was one sequence early on in the film where, frankly, the Fats Domino character was I thought really weak in terms of just the performance. It was really, really weak. And I just felt that was a bit of a missed opportunity. So, it's a tricky one for me, because I really don't understand what his relationship really was with black music. You hear all sorts. I don't know. Wasn't there? Don't know. But all I could see was I just felt like there was definitely a few missed opportunities in the film to perhaps make that more substantial. Along the way.
Yeah, exactly. I just, it's difficult to comment on. I don't want to go too far in either direction. I just think that I would have liked the film to have given us an opinion on it, rather than trying to skirt between the two, and to have, or if you were going to go down that middle ground, we needed the voices of the black community, because I think it was criminally missing, and that for me was kind of the final death nail of this project.
That was when you stormed out of the movie.
I
That's it.
left.
Threw down your popcorn.
I
How
would
dare
never
you, Baz
throw down
Luhrmann.
popcorn. Yeah, but yeah, metaphorically, yeah, it was, and I think that certainly in hindsight, when I reflected on it, that was the moment I found that the element aspect of this I found kind of most difficult. And again, we're kind of retreading some of our conversation here, but without the Baz Luhrmann, the what did you call it? The Bazamataz. Bazamataz, great, love it. Without the Bazamataz, maybe there would be room for this story to be told. And my kind of conclusions on this film are that this is a compelling story that was told by the wrong director. And
okay, interesting.
And I think because I think there is a lot of the stylistic choices here. You know what this feels like to me, and I'm gonna build a shaky metaphor for you here. So
love it. I love a shaky
stay
metaphor.
with me. The way I look at this is a beautiful portrait that's been painted painstakingly, and then someone has come along with PVA glue, glitter, feathers, and stuff like that, and stuck it on it. And so you have to. So somewhere in there is this really beautiful thing, this beautiful work of art, but you've got to spend so much time like looking through all of this stuff to actually get to a point where you can find it. And I think
that's really interesting. That's a good metaphor.
Is that a good metaphor?
That. Yeah,
not too shaky.
It's not too shaky. Yeah, you just need to peel off the PVA glue and the glitter, and it's underneath, right?
Which does utterly. Maybe I'll go with. I'm going to remake that metaphor and make it gold leaf, actually, because I think PVA glue does diminish Baz Luhrmann as a director too much.
There's no Bazamataz in PVA glue, my friend.
There's not. No, there's not.
But there is in gold leaf.
It's been smothered in gold leaf, is what this is, and I think that it smothers the performance of Austin Butler. It smothers there's a lot of smothering going on. It smothers his performance. I think the prosthetics smother Tom Hanks. The Bazamataz, the gold leaf smothers the what could have been really interesting story about the your phrase, the relationship between the two characters. It smothers the quite interesting look at whether Elvis was an appropriator and how black culture influenced him at a time where it's really important to have that sort of representation on screen, and that was just missed entirely. Don't know. I think yeah, it's a potentially wonderful cinematic experience, weighed down by gold leaf and hidden from view by
Bazamataz. That's quite crushing.
Yeah, I didn't really like it. I don't know if you can tell, but
I can tell. Whereas I felt a little bit differently. I think I felt that it was probably less Bazamataz than usual, and I think the movie benefited from that. And I certainly, I definitely think there's some really valid points there around the appropriation piece, around the Hanks prosthetics, some of the characterization, some of the pacing, all of those things. Yes, I do think, from my perspective, he successfully created an interesting relationship between two people and perhaps a different point of view of Elvis than we've seen before, which was a good thing. And I actually wonder whether maybe some of the decision making in putting this film together was around that question of, well, what hasn't been done before? What don't we know? What relationship have we not really explored very much? I mean, there's been so many documentaries and biopics and whatever about the guy, and all the different things. But so maybe it was that. But yeah, I found it quite good from that point of view. Certainly a much better Luhrmann film than I've experienced in the last couple. And I'm a big Luhrmann fan. I must put that out there. Strictly Ballroom has a special place in my heart, and I think I love what he does with filmmaking. I love him as a filmmaker. I just sometimes think, as a scriptwriter, sometimes the spectacle erases
overruns
the
story.
Yeah.
And I totally agree. No, and for the record, I totally agree with that. I think that the problems that I have fit exactly into that, in the fact that
Yeah.
I love him as a filmmaker. I just don't think this is the right story for him to tell. And I
Mm.
think that's what this comes down to, is that I think that for the nuance and I will concede that I will concede that I think he does do a good job of eventually getting round to creating some interesting characters. Once you've already sat through an hour and a half, eventually he gets to creating interesting relationships, and he gets to creating kind of some compelling stuff. He does get there. I just think that you shouldn't have to wade through an hour and a half of montage in order to get to. I'm being hyperbolic there, but
Yeah,
my
no, I
point
like it.
being,
I like it.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's good.
I
I
think the way to soothe you, Marcus,
yeah
is I think
yeah
the next film you should go and see is you should see Strictly Ballroom. I
yeah
think you need to get that out, and I think you need to sit down and you need to, in a quiet place, and just let that film wash over you. And then,
okay
let's come back and chat about the Luhrmann canon, because I
yeah
think I was going to say the departure, but it was the first film, so it was the other way
mm,
around. But
sure.
yeah, it's yeah. Let's see what
Well,
you think.
I think John is ready and raring to go for a
I know.
Lerman
Yeah,
retrospective.
I think I think we're going to get going next week. But it would be good to hear your perspective, because I don't know anyone much. I don't think who's seen. Oh well, actually, it's probably because it's probably because I'm Australian. You see, and everybody's seen Strictly
Yeah,
Ballroom 50 million times. But I haven't come across anyone who's seen other ones, but not seen Strictly Ballroom. So
yeah.
seen the first. So yeah.
Do you know what it was though? When I was a child, I was always loved Shakespeare and everything like that. So I went straight to Romeo and Juliet, and then I found off the back of that Moulin Rouge, and then Australia
Oh,
came out,
oh,
stuff like that. So I kind of went down that route. I was like, oh, that's great.
yeah, got
And
you.
then Strictly Ballroom was always sat there, and I was sort of, as the teenager, as the child, sort of sat there going, oh, I don't really like dancing that much. And
Yeah,
that was about
ballroom
it. And I
dancing.
just, ballroom dancing, just not that into it. And so I never came back to it. But
Yeah,
the time has come after that scathing
it's
review.
definitely come. Yeah, I think so.
I
You need to redeem yourself with Luhrmann, I think. And so he doesn't come around and kill you. You need to
Yeah,
watch Strictly Ballroom and yeah, see what you think.
what a way to go, though. I mean, can you imagine the frills in that death? The gold leaf. I would become a
And the
character
glitter.
smothered by Basmatas.
Died by Basmatas.
Yeah, yeah. What a great obituary.
What a way to go.
Didn't like his film, so he smothered him with it.
So he Basmatased him.
Yeah, he Basmatas.
Glittered and gold leaf to death. That's not a bad way to go. I
It's
got to
not.
say, if you had a choice.
There are far worse ways to go.
Exactly.
Yeah, look, I think we've covered it for the most part. Do you have anything else? Do you have any final
I
thoughts?
think no. I think we've said enough. Yeah. It was definitely well. Okay, here's a question for you. What would you
Mm,
give it out of 10 then, if you had to put a number on it?
maybe a 4, 3 or 4
Okay.
for
Okay.
the 4 because no, I think that's a bit too harsh. Maybe a 5. I think it's not.
Oh, okay.
I d- it's a difficult one because for all of the areas of this that I really struggle with, and the fact that from the fact that I didn't enjoy it, to be honest, I didn't enjoy the film, but that I do still go back to that moment at the International where he was singing Unchained Melody. And it was so powerful and so beautiful, and that whole section of the film. So that section redeems the film for me. I just wish that they'd made just that film that was in that section, rather
Yeah.
than all of this other stuff going on. I
Stop.
wish
Yeah.
they'd just Bazmataz going on. I wish they just made that film that was that section of in the
Yeah.
International, and carried that tone perhaps throughout. What would you give it?
I think I'd give it a 6 or 6.5. I think. Yeah. I definitely, I definitely enjoyed it. I mean, I'm going to say that I actually did enjoy it, and when I didn't really know what to expect, and I was a bit cynical about what I was going to get. So yeah, but I do think, as I said, all your points are really valid, and I do think there were some definite weaknesses in it. But yeah, I think on balance, where my Bazerator sits, if that's a thing, it's definitely a progression. It's definitely a progression in how I felt that this film, from a screenwriting point of view, largely, which is, of course, how we tend to come at it. So yeah,
we do, yeah. I get that. So we're not far apart, really. We're not far
really
apart on.
I think you've kind of backpedaled a little bit just in the last few minutes, like giving him a 5. There's a little bit of backpedal there.
Well, I feel I can't. Yeah, when I'm concerned, I'm going to be basmatazed to death. So I have to be a bit nice. But no, I think that for all of the, I think that that's the thing, is that if that section in the international wasn't there, and if the performances weren't as good, then we'd be right down, But it's redeemed by those elements, and because those elements are so good, that I cannot, in all good conscience, give it lower than, I will stick on a 4, I think, but I can't give it lower than that because, yeah. But it'd be interesting. I think your basometer needs to come into your retrospective.
I need to make one. Yeah,
you do.
Make a little thing, don't I? Yeah, I'll work on that. See if I can.
Is that covered in PVA glue or gold leaf?
Yeah, and definitely glitter. Probably some feathers as well. We'll see.
Yeah.
I'll see what happens. Depends what film I watch first. I think we're doing Strictly Ballroom first, so I think it'll definitely be feathers and
Excellent.
Anyway,
okay.
And fake tan. Bit of fake tan as well.
And fake tan, yes, of course.
Anyway,
love it. Well, when you let me know when you come back to do the retrospective on Elvis,
yes, definitely.
I would very gladly come and have a look at that.
Sounds
with you
great.
again. After a little bit of time and perhaps a rewatch, we'll
yes,
maybe I'll be a little more favourable. Who knows? And John can tell me how wrong I've been about most of what I've said. Yeah. So that's that I'm excited for.
Sounds like fun.
Yeah. Thank you so much for this, Fiona. I hope that's Pleasure. Not been too painful.
No, that's been very fun.
And for all of you watching, thanks for sticking with us through the review of Elvis. As we've referenced a couple of times, there is a Baz Luhrmann retrospective series that will be coming up soon. So keep an eye out for that. That'll be really, really good. I'm excited to watch or participate. Should be fun. And go watch Elvis. Make your own decisions. If you think that I'm wrong, then tell me. If you think I'm right, then tell me. And with all things, just go see films. They're good. I don't know what I'm really summing up here, but anyway, something. Go watch them. Thanks, everybody. Until next time, we will see you soon. Bye bye.
Bye bye.